Hi, everyone. My name is William Goss. I am the Mycology Director at Decriminalize California, an initiative campaign to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms. I'm a resident of the Santa Cruz Mountains. I've been living there for about 7 years, off and on in the mountains and then in Santa Cruz in the city since about 2013. And this year we had unprecedented fires, and we're still in the middle of fire season. And this is a very important issue, and it's been affecting the entire West Coast and other places around the world in a really big way. And I felt like with the efforts that were going on, I thought that it would be really important to try to compile information about what's going on, who's doing what, and hopefully offer some tools and optimism for the relief, recovery, and remediation in post-fire. And we're going to touch on mycoremediation, but you'll see that this is a very complex, complicated set of circumstances, and there's a long history that I'll only be able to touch on, and a lot of moving pieces that make this, something that people study for a very long time and become experts in. And I'm only one person with very small amount of information to share, but hopefully this will encourage you to learn more and be inspired that we do have, paths forward for success. So this picture was from the Bonnie Doon Friends of the Fire Department at their ecological reserve, which I hike around sometimes. There's some really good views in the California coastal mountain range overseeing the Pacific Ocean. And so what this is a picture of it is a bristlecone pine cone. It's actually adapted to fire, as many of the plants in California ecosystem plant communities are. This is a process called serotiny, or a serotinous cone. And there's really cool science that shows that some plants are adapted to the heat of the fire, some plants are adapted to the smoke of the fire, some are adapted to both, and that fire is actually a very important and sometimes absolutely necessary component of plant survival. And this striking contrast and color with the Fibonacci sequence and radial symmetry really catches my eye, and this came from a burned area. So it seems like every year these fires get closer and closer to home. And so in August 19, last 2 months prior, about 6 weeks ago, I had to evacuate my home. I had a mandatory evacuation order, and we were waiting. We knew that there were fires in the nearby vicinity. Air quality was getting terrible, and every day we were watching for orders and warnings. First, I actually missed the order, and despite my best efforts to try to stay on top of things with my privileged resources of Wi-Fi and internet and computers. So I ended up sleeping that night very poorly, 5 hours of sleep, and then realized in the morning, hey, I got the warning, got the order, I gotta go. So this has been very troubling, as every year there's more and more fires, and this one was unprecedented. And I couldn't talk about fire ecology or remediation without touching on the long history of genocide in this country, the indigenous tribes of California. We have this great, we used to have this great diversity. There's so many living tribe members that are still governing and managing lands, not in the amount and concentration and power that I think we need to start moving towards with re-indigenization and getting rid of this colonization. And you can see that this is very very small, rough picture of the map of California and what's affected. And so let's see if we're right in this area right here in what we call the Central Coast. We've got the Bay Area right up here. And so I've drawn pictures from other fires up around here, Sonoma, what we call Sonoma, Napa, but where we're talking about is right around here. It's a little blurry, but you can see that this is an evacuation order in the red. This is tens of thousands of acres that were evacuated. People in this area were evacuated. The yellow was the warning, and so another one. So there are many, many maps from many, many different agencies, including I think my favorite was the NASA heat maps, because I thought that was a very accurate way to tell where the fire actually was. And they had satellites, recording these things every 24 hours. And just a kind of quick little, explanation. So I live around here. I used to live up in Big Basin, and then below University of California down here in Wilder Ranch, I used to live down on the west side of Santa Cruz. I also used to live up closer to the Sweetno State Park. A number of my friends were naturalists in these lands, doing the youth programs for their outdoor school science camp, 4-night, 5-day field trip. Really rewarding experience to be a teacher and a naturalist and to help steward some of the land. I was a garden coordinator and taught kids how to do organic gardening, and had a really good time. But between the fires and COVID, actually all of our programs had to end for the year. So it's really sad, but this just shows you kind of the scope of the area that was affected. And a number of my friends had homes that were burned and structures that were burned to them. And there's nothing left of that. Here is at the same time as the fire in the area that I'm very close to, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. At the very same time, we had down south to Big Sur, down to Salinas, down in San Jose, east there. And then even right now, there are more fires in Napa. These were all extinguished and contained, but we're not out of the fire season yet. So please send us your prayers and best wishes and donations and whatever feels right. And we're kind of all in this together. We're affected by fires, other places are affected by other things, and even after the fire season, there are more concerns that we'll get into. But this is a really distressing concern in California, and it has been for a while, and it will continue to be until we really take a closer look and really join efforts. This was a secret map that I wasn't really supposed to have, but the red line is where they basically stopped the fire. This is like literally where the efforts were on the front lines. I had an opportunity to view some of that. I don't think I included pictures of that experience, but it was getting really close to these cities. The area started after lightning. That's why it's called the lightning complex, lightning fire complex. Everyone was really excited to see this lightning, and then sure enough, in the mountains and really inaccessible areas, the fires were started. And so you can see these topographic maps, just how steep they are. I'm not sure what the key is on these, but you can see the closer the lines are together, the steeper the landscape is. This is an air current map showing how the air quality and the air is moving. And what this shows actually, and what this should rate, is that air and wind movements and currents actually also have a big role to play in the spread of fire, and that was certainly the case here. And after the fires, or kind of as they were being contained, we started to understand what the risks may be associated with the rainstorms, the impending rainstorms in this upcoming rainy season may have in the landscape, in our ecology, in our watershed. And in the reds, the kind of the danger zones, areas that were severely affected by fire. And around the black dots, that's kind of the outlining of how the watershed, the sensitive areas in the watershed may be impacted. These were some updates from Twitter and Instagram, and I think we got up to close to it's around 140,000 acres, 80,000 acres. I'm sorry, blanking, but started with zero containment, and it really ignited really fast and really took over, and it just kept burning for about a week and a half, and it took a long time for it to actually be 100% contained. There is a point at which, when containment has increased to a very high amount, it's much less of a concern. But until it's 100% contained, there's always a chance that it can spread, depending on where it is in the landscape. So this was really a massive effort in California, and there were a few casualties. You can see this one at that time, and close to 1,200 structures were burned. Countless animals die in these events, and we allowed wild animals, and we really are concerned, even though that fire is part of the local ecology, in greater California ecology, there's a devastation from these types of fires that are really hard to be resilient with, and so we've got to, this should be a little harrowing and maybe challenging to kind of internalize. I see these numbers and I have a very hard time actually equating that to the reality of the situation that we're in. And as I've been working on this presentation in real time, gathering resources, I've found myself being really heartbroken, and like my spirit hasn't been broken, but it's been challenged in a lot of ways. And certainly, other people have had more challenges than I am. I'm very fortunate in that I didn't lose the place that I have been living at after 19, and no one that I know was hurt in this, but friends did lose their property. So this was a devastating picture. I believe the Bay Bridge, very close to home and very close to the human habitat. And I should say that picture was from a couple of years before, but this is what's happening, year in, year out. You can see that there's, no forest is the same. You got a lot of little trees, you got some ridges here, but you can see how some of these trees are getting cleared out between, and how high some of the fire kind of goes up into the canopy. And what we saw on the front lines was burn scars and embers going up, sometimes engulfing the entire tree. A lot of the trees that survived may have burns up to 20-30 feet, and we hadn't seen that before. And those burns stay around, so all the time I've been hiking, I've never seen burns as high as they are now. This is downtown Boulder Creek, the town that houses Big Basin, and this is in the middle of the day. So, there's this very dense, amount of ash deposited in the air. It settles out, it moves. I believe some of this ash and smoke ended up in the East Coast and beyond. So this should kind of necessitate more solidarity, outside of, there are no boundaries when it comes to these sort of things, and we need to work together. We really need to come together as a people to find the right path, to correct our path, and work together. And this was up north a little bit in Sonoma, Napa, and you can see these greenhouses and people's gardens, and it's so dark, and so just kind of tough to see. This was a map of satellite image, and the lines of the borders, of course, are overlaid. They don't truly exist. And this is a massive amount of land that was burned, millions of acres throughout California. And now Oregon had very intense fires, and are still having fires. Washington, haven't heard much out of Alaska, but the whole West Coast experiences this, and it's very tough. We really haven't solved it by any means, and we're gonna get to an optimistic point soon in this presentation, but we are taking action as a community. But I just included this. This is from another outdoor school, Camp Creme, serving folks with disabilities. And their entire site was burned. Where I used to teach in Big Basin, after the program had left, their cabins that the house, the crew leaders and folks that were managing that land, including a friend of mine, their cabins burned, the same cabins that he had students sleeping in. So yes, this is a very serious thing. It's a very personal thing now, more so now than ever. And it can't hit really any closer to home until my home is actually burned, but we're going to work to stop that and stop that for the community. And I think it's going to take some drastic action because how awful this was. So I'm going to steer away from the doom and gloom, but there was a course correction, I believe a couple decades ago, from the California Department of Resource Management or Forestry or something. They called it CAL FIRE, and that was actually a really big shift in the zeitgeist and the way that we perceive the ecology after decades, after centuries of fire suppression and genocide of the indigenous land stewards that have used fire, throughout their time here. However long that is, we don't know exactly. And they would have frequent fires and what we would call a controlled burn. We'll get into that a little bit later. This is actually a collaboration from the Onamutsin tribe. Remember that map of the indigenous, that they are one of the local tribes in the area. They've actually experienced a victory, so a victory for all in reclaiming some of their land. So they're with a group in Año Nuevo State Park, I believe, here, surveying the land together. And so I'm looking forward to more of these cross-cultural communal collaborations. And I think a lot of this work should look like re-indigenizing the land and empowering and providing resources for the local indigenous populations to reassume their responsibilities and services of land stewardship, and the rest of us can do. The rest of us colonial settlers can offer resources and time and money to help them with that. And on that note, much of California used to be Mexico, and this was another kind of optimistic, heartwarming act of firefighters in Mexico moving up to California to help us with fires. I believe they were fighting fires in Southern California. They have their own fire season down there. I've had friends lose their families lose their homes in Southern California fires. I think it wasn't really until more recently, in the last couple of decades, where the Northern California fires started to feel more and more real. But for Southern California folks, there was this very set fire season that correlated with the Santa Ana winds, and how oxygenating the fire, moving fire in the landscape, really adds to the devastation and unpredictability. Although, to some degree, we can predict these things. In our dry season, summer, there isn't rain for like 6 months here, and we have that opportunity in the rainy season and in the dry season to affect change. So, with some of what we're talking about today, it's a lot of treating of the symptom and not the underlying issue, the disease, and we need all of that. There's a kind of an essence of a triaging of these issues and kind of going to the most challenging, maybe lowest hanging fruit, immediate relief things, and then moving on to the long-term systemic and long-term visioning of how we would like to live in the future. And helping with that range, we have the Resource Conservation District, or the RCD, and it is a program in California. I don't know if it's in other states, but it is a non-regulatory agency under the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, which has a lot of good work happening in it. Some of my friends have worked for the NRCS. It goes into farm work, it goes into land management on the agricultural level, as well as the land human habitat for the people living in these areas, and going into things such as floods, wildfires, earthquakes, and other natural disasters. But to some degree, we maybe shouldn't call them natural disasters. if they are a part of the local ecology, it's a disaster to us because of the way it impacts our home. So there may be a need to reframe some of this, but obviously it is a disaster to a lot of people, and we need to work towards reducing that. And there's so much to do, but we have a lot of resources and a lot of people care deeply about this. And in the time since the fire, the RCD has really stepped up and offered a lot of resources, including these free webinars. I've actually had a chance to speak personally with Rich Cassell, who's helping a local effort in empowering grassroots and community members that want to do good. And I'm actually personal friends with Matt Weld. I partied with him at one of my friends, a friend that I used to live with in the co-ops at UC Davis. And he's a really great guy, civil engineer, working on a lot of drainage and erosion issues. Some of my slides have pictures from his presentation. And they are offering other webinars and future trainings on like wattle installation and more. So there's a lot of great resources at their website, and these experts are brought in by the RCD and offer these services. And since it is a non-regulatory agency, there isn't like the kind of red tape that organizations like the EPA or wildlife and fishery department or FEMA, for instance, may have around it. So they offer kind of a very unique role in the community, offering fish and wildlife. All right, so this was from Rich Cassell in understanding, how fire plays a role in the land. It's something I learned about in a plant communities class I took back in college when I was getting my degree in plant sciences. And we'll touch on more native plants and their fire adaptations, but it is important to know that fire is a part of this. And in ways that the fire is actually very beneficial. And sometimes less is more. So when we get to the human habitat, we have a lot of work to do. And in the rest of the land, we also have a lot of work to do. So there's like all these sort of overlapping and extensive amount of, it's a laundry list of work to do in this. And these folks have had decades of experience in these sort of things. And that takes that type of knowledge and experience when doing things like site assessments and surveying the land and understanding burn severity and whatnot. And so I like this sort of like, succinct way of describing, what we should and shouldn't do. And that is, a very simplistic way of talking about this in ways, but it really comes down to the eye and training and having all this time and experience with the land. And that is why, we've done such a disservice to the land and the people and that have been tending the land for millennia. And it's just on that note, people say that every square mile of California had some level of management or manipulation or tending by the indigenous. And so, I think of the sheer size and gravity of the area that we're working with in California, we need to empower so much more management of the land. We should be empowering people who literally have it in their blood, from ancestral knowledge to be empowered to do this. And biology, the plants, the fungi, the bacteria, the animals, are part of that, as well as the indigenous and natives of this land. And so there are a few infographics I included. There's a lot of different ways to look at this. There's a lot of different layers to this. And there's getting rid of fire triangle. What happens to make the fire? We got the kind of the source. You mentioned for the CZU fire complex is the lightning that sparked it. But it also takes a dry environment and lots of downed trees and weak trees and unthinned trees, and then the air moving, it adds to the movement and feeds to the fire. So this shows you a little bit about what burn severity may look like. Sorry for the resolution, but really in these pictures, you don't see a lot of green. You don't see, right near right here, there's some green leaves, but there's a lot of damage that happens just by high heat, and these trees are likely to survive, but they get weakened and they take a while to bounce back. You can also see, these trees are very close together, and it adds to the problem when you have the fuel load right next to each other, and you don't have bigger trees spaced out more, and you can see all that debris and fuel load below. So this is showing you a little steep ravine, and the little trees here get burnt out, and you leave the big ones, and that to some degree that's kind of what we want. But all is not lost. You see in the background, there's right next to this medium severity fire, you've got the big green trees in the back. So it's very interesting to see how it moved. But truthfully, there was just such a large land mass that got devastated and fully burned. And so that's another way of looking at severity, and part of it is how high up the fire goes, and another part of it is the needles, and they actually are pushed by the fire and kind of get set that way. Both of those trees aren't going to make it likely. You can also look at the cambium layer, that is the living center of the trunk. The wood and the heartwood are actually dead, and they are dead tree material, but they actually contribute to the structural resilience and life cycle of the tree. And so its cambium layer kind of continues to expand and moving on one side of the bark, and on the other side you've got wood. And so you can actually dig into a burned tree to see if it is still alive by looking at the cambium layer exactly. And then a lot of these redwoods, you see on the right, get these burns, and then they start to light the root system on fire, actually. And so redwoods are incredibly resilient. They have 6 sets of chromosomes, 6 pairs of chromosomes. Unlike humans, that have 2 pair of our chromosome set. So they have the adaptations on their bark, and having anti-fire chemicals, and just having this resiliency that many other plants have, but redwoods have it in spades. We can also measure the fire intensity in the soil itself, or the understory as well. And the stumps, the way they burn, they can almost look like a rocket stove, because the root system can catch on fire, and then the stump kind of creates a kind of a contained structural addition to the inside part of the fire, and so it starts to burn up, and then it goes shoots up. So we have these are from some of the presenters talking about the burn severity and what to look for with fuel loading, how the fire behaves in the environment, and some kind of tools that folks in the forestry, tree surveying kind of arena are looking for when they're deciding what trees they need to take out. A lot of it's like wait and see how the tree may bounce back. And there's a lot of sentiment by these experts that less is more, and that doing nothing sometimes is better. But that is a sentiment specifically for some areas, and then kind of in the bigger picture, there's a lot we have to do, and specifically right around where we're concerned with future burns, which may be in the next month, who knows. And it's also important to know that this is an accumulation of a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience, and at the same time, every tree is different, every land area is different, and it's sometimes impossible to just put things in boxes and say this is the way it should be. There's no silver bullet for this work, but we have a lot of ways to help ourselves to kind of conceptualize this in kind of the more of an academic, more of a scientific approach. But by all means, we need all the approaches at this point. We just need so much help to understand what the problem is and how to act. And one big part of that, why so many people are concerned is because it's bringing more and more homes. You have people who own homes, who are property managers, and they are trying to make money or just trying to live, and live in these homes that are not too rural. I love the isolation of the redwoods. The quietness. It's not really isolation, but it does keep getting closer and closer to the human landscape in the cities, and that certainly was the case in the Paradise Fires, for instance. And so this shows you some of the approaches people take around what's called defensible space, and that's just a term used for the land right around your home or any structure. The lock and scatter technique is a way to reduce the fuel load concentration. It will also allow some break for the impending rain that will fall. And the fungi will continue to break down the fuel when it is in contact, or not even if it's in contact with the soil. But this is one way that you can not have to take everything out and chip it, for instance, but just kind of leaving it with kind of the not the least amount of work, but because there is so much work that is needed, this is going to be a very appropriate technique to deal with a lot of land. Yeah, fire breaks are often related to fire roads, for instance, and just clearing a line of fuel load. So not only can people get up there and firefighters can bring equipment and tools and hoses to that space, but fire breaks will actually just stop the fire, by means of having trees removed in a specific line or contour in the landscape. And that can be done in many ways. You can have loppers, you can have chainsaws, you can have bulldozers, and it's really just about clearing the area sometimes. And you can see in the foreground, we got the fire and the burn severity around the line, and then actually this retaining wall, concrete, literally stop the fire, and it is that principle of a fire break. In this case, it's actually a physical structure, but then you don't have much fuel load behind it. You can see how it cracked up, and it looks like some palm trees, for those folks who enjoy palm trees. But this was a success of not having your house burned. And you can see on the left all that cleared defensible space. On the right, you can see the little pockets of green and then the tan brown mostly around it. So this defensible space is a really important technique, thing to think about. And with that, there's not just the impending rest of the fire season, but after the fire goes through, and use the structural support in the soil of the soil by the tree roots and the rhizosphere and the food web in the soil, losing all that biology, you have this impending mudslide and landslide and erosion in the upcoming rainy season. And you can see how steep that is. These folks are keeping balance on a steep terrain and walking through this little creek in the watershed. You got these burned redwood trees all around. Not much of an understory at this point. And think of the intensity of rain that we get. Maybe an inch or so in a matter of hours, which doesn't seem like a lot. But what happens is that that's just enough to make things that are just slightly settled unsettled, and you can see a debris flow, which we'll get back into, right actually in that creek, and that is a sign from a previous mudslide or landslide event. As well as the mudslides, and more immediately before the rainy season, we have this other concern around water, which is the water quality. There were a number of water systems that were burned by this fire, and these chemicals, like benzene, like polyethylene, which that would have come from probably a plastic piping, gets into the water, and then you can't drink it. And There are other concerns around biology and things that you could boil to make your water clean. But when you're talking about plastics, when you're talking about heavy metals or hydrocarbons, petrochemicals, and things like that, that is a big no-no. And if folks want to ask me about water quality and water systems, I was Monterey Mushrooms, Morgan Hill Facilities, Water Systems Operation Distributor and Treatment Specialist after there was polluting of the local watershed. We had a lot of sampling we had to do after that, and numbers and concentrations of chemicals that we had to maintain or prevent. And so this is another thing that's very near and dear to my heart, is like, how is the water going to be impacted? How is it already impacted? And how do we create resilient water systems for communities? And part of that relates to erosion and maintaining safety, not just for the humans, but the wildlife. There's an element of adaptation in the ecosystem for mudslides, for landslides. Yet we have reached a point where it is so devastating in the area that we have to take action. We have to do something in certain situations, and others maybe less is more. So not that much rain actually is necessary to turn on a landslide or a mudslide, particularly in these steeper areas. And you can see how that can lead to devastation in the human habitat, and on the foundation of homes, entire homes will slide away. And we also have, in most areas, there's floodplains to be worried about as well, and where that water ends up settling. Even though we do have very steep land, relatively, in the Santa Cruz Mountains, there are also floodplains in those mountains. And that gets me to this incredible kind of compendium of resources that are offered by these agencies. I received my license and certificate with the Water Board of California, Water Resources Board, and then they are part of this broader coalition that creates this Watershed Emergency Response Team report, or we call it the WERT. And you can see just how extensive it is. And you talk about a very multidisciplinary approach. We've got all these professionals, decades of experience, PhDs, what have you, that are involved in everything related to the land, really. I mean, most things, maybe not spirituality and other things like that, but or mycology. We want to get some more attention towards the kind of often forgotten microorganisms that are a important part of it. And I promise we will get to mycology briefly. And then another part of that is like trying to understand what these people are talking about. Here's a list of acronyms that people use, and that would probably just reduce the size of this Word report, by a couple, 10 pages or something, just by using these acronyms, because there's a lot you can see in this just beginning page that they are already using those acronyms, and yeah, they kind of go into the specifics, kind of broad strokes to begin with, and then they get into the detailed ways that each of these areas of that have been impacted, to what degree they're impacted, and what the concerns are following that. So yeah, there's a lot of text in here. It's a very long document. I didn't include it all, but you can start to see basically kind of the way this is framed, and this is the way this what our response looks like. I like this little sequence here, as far as like what the steps people take to arrive at risk reduction. We have determine soil burn severity, identify values at risk, identify, model, and classify hazards, develop emergency protective measures, and communicate findings. And as far as making this accessible, I've seen some really great examples of accessibility and getting the information out, but that's always going to be an issue, and that will always be something that we have to work diligently to do, to include people in the greater community, people that are more at risk, people who don't have the privilege of resources or understanding of these systems, which are complex. There are so many agencies that I'm not even going to touch on today that are involved in this work, and and it is a mountain seemingly to try to climb through all this information. But they do a pretty good job of making it accessible and making things just kind of offering different ways in which to look at this. Here's some information from the water boards. And it's going to be any day now until we really get that first big rain, and there's a lot of concern for when that happens, what it'll do, and a lot of danger. A lot of those landslides, mudslides, are activated at that point, or slightly after, or after the second big rain. So trying to do what we can now, and we'll go into kind of a team effort in just a little bit. But the local governance is providing these resources. Here's that guy Rich Cassell I've mentioned before. And there's the offerings of these folks. There are some challenges with the institutional agencies, and insurance becomes an issue in this. One of the things that people kind of think about, our team in the mycoremediation realm is thinking about these wattles and excavating them, and there's really great ways for them to be installed. You stake them, you put them in these watersheds sometimes, and you put them around burnt structures, and then sometimes people do this with them, and this is not really amounting much, not staked very evenly, not on contoured, not dug in sometimes. So there's a lot that can be done that's wrong and actually damaging to the environment. Whenever you're manipulating, you have the opportunity to concentrate the water and make it more devastating to the environment. People offer these erosion control mixes, but oftentimes they'll have invasive species, which is no good. Drainage is another part of this, and we have all these drainage systems that don't have the capacity for these large fire and mudslide and landslide events. And so there's a need for reimagining and reengineering of these from folks who have those skills and services. And as part of that, talking about the watershed, we have our own steelhead and coho salmon populations here that are certainly at risk for this, these issues, and the contamination of the watershed potential is very high. And so folks can come together to do a lot of fundraising. It's great to see that. And there's progress, there are cancellations of do not drink, do not boil. Eventually we did get it 100% contained, so 86,000. You can see that the residences. But I used this report to try to imagine how many feet of wattle we may need to cover the structures and their toxic materials. And there really is this effort, in this community to to be proactive and to take the knowledge base and pool that we have and put it into action. And so I'm part of this group called the Wildfire Protectors Corps, CRPS.org, and we are figuring out how to maneuver through all of this right now. There are many other groups like Sanders Relief. There's a lot of Facebook groups. We're learning from other people related to the campfire, paradise fires, and what tools we have in our toolkit. Ecosystem Restoration Camp is a great international organization that helps in the landscape. I touched on insurance, and this is someone who has taken upon themselves to figure out the kind of insurance realm and how can we act with them or act away from them, or kind of create our own insurance policies or companies to better manage these problems and to better provide relief and assistance to people. And I want to include this because there's many ways to get this conversation more mainstream and to talk about this. And the more we talk about this, hopefully the more we act on it. So people are even trying to find ways to write about it. We're in communication with folks who do video so that we can get the story out and tell people so that, we are more proactive, that this is a solidarity effort, of anyone, that it is affected by fire or not that want to help. There's just so much to do. And where I come into it is I have my ecology background. And so I studied at UC Davis. I got a minor in ecology. I was very fortunate to actually have taken like cultivation classes and mushroom ecology and biochemical classes, and got some lab experience as well. So I'm actually kind of new to this mushroom here. This is Stropharia rugosa annulata. Has some remediative effects, and my buddy who works for Davies Trees, which has a contract with PG&E, he actually gave me some of the spawn, and I'm super stoked to be growing it out. Here's a little pin. It is probably pinning because of stress, but I've been expanding its mycelium, and the effort, the idea is that with more mycologists in the area and concerned citizens, concerned scientists, people who want to help take action, that we have fungal cultures that are specifically adapted to remediating the problems that we've essentially created for ourselves. And Stropharias, I think from Europe, but we're putting out a call to mushroom foragers who are finding new and cool wild specimens, new in this upcoming season, so we can get more locally adapted genetics for the landscape and to put them to use in remediative capacities. And my friend Taylor Bright offered this slide in the Watershed Defense Seminar around post-fire ecological first responders. And after a fire, we have this secondary disturbance of the water and the rain leaching out these contaminants and moving them into the watershed, and we really need to stop that. So those are some important questions to ask yourself, or ideas to kind of dwell on. This is another slide from the presentation, but this is the problem that we're up against. We have these structures, these homes that were burned, all sorts of chemicals that have been created, that are just kind of in the landscape now. Think of like underneath your sink and all those chemicals. Like obviously they're bad at high concentrations. They're bad after they're burned. They're just not great, most of them, before and especially after. And they have that capacity to really be a detriment and toxin, a lethal toxin for the wildlife. And we have an avid surfing community in Santa Cruz, and that's why I think there's a larger kind of environmental focus, because those surfers, don't want to be swimming in this toxic water, and there are a lot of environmentalists enjoy the wildlife around here. So we have this great capacity to stop this secondary disaster, as they put it, for the watershed contamination. And so again, went through why this is such a big issue, and what we have at our disposal are the fungal defenders. And just for how complex the problem is, the solution is equally complex and complicated. We'll dispel some of that mystery and complication right now. This is the growing hyphal tip of a fungus. A little bunch of mycelium can have millions or billions of hyphal tips, where the action, the enzymes are created and exuded to interface with the natural environment. And these enzymes are many. There's a myriad of them. They're doing all sorts of things, and they're kind of controlled and affected by a number of different factors, but they have the capacity to break down so many intense chemical compounds. And Paul Stamets has really brought this to light with some of his microfiltration projects. And so these are a couple of examples of that. You can check out this report on fungi.com or fungiperfecti.com. I'm blanking on that. This is a little schematic. You've got the Pacific Northwest solid chips. You've got the water coming out there, and then this is where the action happens, where the mycelium is latching on to those toxins, breaking it down, degrading it, chelating it, immobilizing it, basically taking away the toxicity for the water that continues to flow through. And there's a lot of different ways this looks like, but one concern is, you don't want to necessarily add like plastic into that, like wattle netting, because then you're adding microplastics, and that's not good too. It's talked about maybe using plastic wattles right around the structures that are going to get burnt, right around the burn structures that are going to leach out toxic chemicals, because at some point, the mycelium may just latch on to those toxins, and then you'll actually have to throw those away eventually, because like what else are you going to do with such toxic materials? There's potential to degrade, there's potential to just accumulate or hyperaccumulate, and we need to think of kind of the longevity of that, but certainly doing something to stop that contamination of the watershed is kind of first and foremost in our minds. And mycelium can actually be buoyant. This is up in the Puget Sound, and can be salt tolerant as well. And there's a lot of salts that are created from the ash. It's actually just oil that the mycelium on the left is accumulating. And there are cases even at Monterey mushrooms, when we had an oil spill, that dead mycelium can even actually reduce those polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, those PAHs that are in these petrochemicals. And there's a lot of different types of hydrocarbons in petrochemicals. This is one of the Halcyon test projects with, I think there's like 1%, 1 to 2% oil per weight or volume, which actually results in like thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of parts per million in that soil. So it's, a little is actually a lot, and that's why we need like so much spawn being bulked up. And then you see all these mushrooms doing pretty well. Those are some pretty big ones. I wouldn't eat them though. But we need to do the research and testing to find out maybe we can, or they're not that bad, or they still have a little way to go, or the other microbes are coming in. But seeing the plants kind of emerge from that was really heartening to see the mushrooms grow, and the bugs eat the mushrooms, and the birds eat the bugs, and then the birds poop out some seeds, and then the seeds from elsewhere grow in the soil that's been created by the fungus, and it's kind of a beautiful cycle. Maybe there were some toxins that weren't degraded, but it's now getting kind of diluted, much more diluted out there in the world. And there's that phrase, solution to dilution is pollution. And there's one approach versus kind of like having sacrificial zones for the toxins that are so kind of permanent. And but to me, this is kind of a win there. And the plants also have a role, the bacteria also have a role, as well as the fungus themselves. Hemp is a really good example of a crop that gets used for phytoremediation. There's a big concern up in the Santa Cruz Mountains with all these cannabis growers, which kind of notorious up there, for like what's going to happen to their crops. And because cannabis and hemp are such good hyper accumulators, so I was telling people, maybe you're actually removing the top little like centimeter or 2 centimeters of soil, and you're actually putting a layer or something to like a plastic layer to prevent more ash from falling. So I hope people don't get sick from smoking that cannabis, but people are going to smoke what they want to smoke, and we'll get testing for it. And there's a lot of testing labs like SC labs that do those sort of things. Grape growers, like some of my friends are natural winemakers, and there are like these vintages of wine that are the smoky vintage, and unfortunately that will be the case for a lot of the 2020 wines that are produced. And there's not much that you can do around it. Some people really like it though. So but maybe the yeast, that are getting inoculated in these batches, or the wild yeast that are already there, are finding some way to deal with it. There's a lot of straining and filtering in those processes. So we might get, since we are talking about mycology here, well, this isn't a fungus, but this still is a important topic that's related to oak trees. There's an mycete, or slime mold, a genus of them, Phytophthora, which means plant destroyer, that is really devastating our oak populations, which have mycorrhizal symbioses with a lot of our like choice edibles, like golden chanterelle, the biggest chanterelle, black trumpets, which are one of my favorites, and then the more saprophytic fungi like oysters and lion's mane, for instance, rely on these oak species. And this mycete that really spreads in the wet season is co-hosting with date laurels, and then infecting oaks and eventually causing them to die. There is a leading theory that because of fire suppression, you got all these snags and branches and weak trees that are actually more prone to disease, and that might be kind of the root cause of said oak death. We're doing our best to get as much information from the experts, which I'm proud that some of those experts were folks that were teaching my mycology classes at Davis, to find out the best information and best practices for land management in regards to this. And the kind of the main thought that I've been seeing is that we have to do this work in the dry season, because in the wet season, as we know, the fungi are really are prolific. So that's true for slime molds as well with sudden oak death disease. And so we've offered a lot of different kind of ideas and different systems and processes and techniques, and you have to take a step back and think of how we balance with nature and thinking of all these systems. And we want to work with the fire, and we want to use fire to better inform how we should act in the natural environment. We know what fire suppression does. We know what ecologically managed forests look like, and we need to really have a course shift. And Unfortunately, Smokey the Bear didn't do it for us, so we need a new mascot, or no mascot. We just need more people doing the right thing and being empowered and given the resources to do that. These are prescribed burns. I'm a very big proponent of that. We just need to be doing more of it. It's interesting to see, like, we're actually adding, fuel to the fire, actually adding oil to burn sometimes. And hey, that's what it takes, to get things going sometimes. You can see this is just such a dense stand, and it's clearing, and then there it is. That is just a much better, more resilient landscape for fires. We've got the California Native Plant Society. That is another one of these nonprofits that have offered resources and knowledge in the space. We've got all these native plants that have resistance, tolerance, or there's adaptations to fire. This is the bigger takeaway here. The fire-resistant plant qualities. Low sap or resin content, like pine trees will light up because their sap is very flammable. Eucalyptus has flammable oils as well. They're invasive. And this has brought up a lot of questions about invasive versus native species that are adapted. And so there's a lot of different ways to think about plants, and fire adaptations are certainly what we're seeking out. Scotch broom, another invasive plant that is all around California, is very, very flammable. So there is potential to, break that down, turn the soil, replant natives, maybe inoculate the chips of downed trees or downed invasives, and add to the soil that will give life to native species, and those new natives will have mycorrhizal associations, and the mycorrhizae will create soil structure and create a better ecosystem in the soil for fungi and bacteria and plants and soil food web to be cohesive and offer us, a better path forward. And so you have to manage for some of the invasives as well as replanting natives, and not a strict kill all the invasives, but maybe we're cutting them back and we're using them for good, and we're using them in a long-term vision for planting more natives. There's some regrowth of plants that are adapted. Hence one ends with some local pictures of spreading oaks. We got some ferns here. It's a bay laurel, an oak, another oak. It's a redwood. So it's happened immediately after the fires left. Although they truly never leave us. They're always in the environment and the effects. So it's a permanent thing we have to think about. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks for listening. And you can reach me at my email or my Instagram. I'm involved in psilocybin decriminalization, so you can check it out at our campaign, decrimca.org. We have a private social network at decrimusa.org for folks that are interested in passing initiatives in their state and working on that level. And then if you have friends or family are interested in learning more or getting involved, check out Wildfire Protectors Corps.
All right, welcome to the live Mushroom City with Daniel, or Evergreen. I know he was Evergreen. So welcome. Thanks for participating with your talk this year. Lots of really good information. Thanks for sharing it.
Hey, Evergreen, welcome. It's awesome to have you back at Mushroom City. You spoke 2 years ago about bioremediation. And so really delighted to have you return. And yeah, you're out in Santa Cruz right now. The fires that have so devastated and ravaged California, you're in the midst of all of it. And we're making your presentation in the middle of the relief efforts that you were part of. So really, yeah, it's completely interwoven in with that experience, which is current and so fresh. Do you want to talk to us more about what your experience is right now on the ground?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's really an honor to join you all. Thanks, Steph. Thanks, Robin. you all did a bang up job this year, and very happy to be a part of it again. And yeah, this is like chapter 2, right? Because 2 years ago started getting more understanding of how mycoremediation works, and now we are facing a real challenge and opportunity to put some of those practices and techniques into motion. This presentation was difficult for me and challenging in many ways, but it's really important to do. And there was maybe a little bit less on the myco side, but certainly providing the context for the situation and the whole community efforts and all the interdependent relationships among agencies, those relationships, those dynamics are really important. But the experience is real. This was very, very sobering. Like almost every day, there's a moment of kind of these harrowing experiences. And I was thinking when you said that, when you asked that question, it's kind of coming full circle because I joined the Santa Cruz Mountains as a naturalist educator. And what we stressed as we were teaching and providing safe spaces in nature for youth, for 5th and 6th graders, we wanted to teach differently. And we were actually asked to help with these next generation science standards, which have a lot to do about experiential learning. And that kind of concept to me is what I'm living right now in the preparation for this presentation, and just the preparation of life in general for this moment. And I really feel the catalyst of these fires getting closer and closer to home, to the point now where it's not just like maybe one person whose home I know has burned, but it's several, and they're like down the road. Or just 2 days ago, I went on site assessments with the Resource Conservation District with a friend of mine from the area who lives with a co-op mate from college, and he's a civil engineer. And we went with another person from the RCD that's starting their forest health program to get a kind of foundational, eye training, through this like experiential learning of observation. These experts have been studying and been in the field for decades in some cases, and are really writing the books around post-fire relief. And the sites, the homes that we visited from folks that had volunteered to basically ask for that assessment for folks to walk on their property. If they have some wild area, checking that out. Some people had some waterways, but it was really important to like be out there. And it was actually the same road that I was very familiar with living and working in Big Basin State Park as a naturalist educator up there. And on the way up that road, this is Highway 236 or Big Basin Highway, there were burns on the left and right side of the road, both in the wild natural environment, but also the human habitat that's very closely interwoven with this. So this like interweaving component. And I should add to say that the road actually closes at a certain point. So I wanted to go up to see my old site, the old outdoor school that I worked at. There's this abandoned garden that I tended and added like inches of soil organic matter. And sometimes I try to go back and harvest the apples, but I know that it's now being used for like a FEMA EPA staging ground. And a friend that was part of a trail group up there, her cabin burned, the same cabin that we hosted, thousands of kids, not all at once, but, over the decade and a half or 2 decades that the outdoor school was there. So, this has just hit me closer to home than it like should ever for anyone. And it really is demanding kind of the best of us to work together and really move forward and change our behavior.
Right. And then there's so little in the way or no government response that it's really citizens have had to bear these relief efforts on their shoulders.
Yeah, and that's a really important dynamic. And I won't say that there's no support. In fact, there is this community relief event. I signed up for FEMA to try to get some cash for the time that I had to evacuate my home for about 2 weeks. They had folks from like the environmental health department. They had a lot of donations from different groups. They even had like the local congressperson come out.
Okay.
But you're totally right. I mean, that there isn't enough of that support, and the systems that have failed us are the ones that are still around, and we haven't replaced them fully. However, a non-regulatory agency has basically emerged in the last, like, they've been around, the Resource Conservation District has been around for like 60 years. And they have this very like intimate relationship because it was basically born from homeowners. And I think it's an interesting dynamic for me. And it's really heartwarming to see folks that are like as this non-regulatory agency, they can kind of weave like through the the more legitimate like institutional agencies, but then interface with the actual community members to enact best practices from all these experts that they draw from the community. So they always tie in people who have been doing this for a long time, or consultants that do this for a living, and tie in with whatever research is out there. But it's the kind of like the first phase right now is toxic debris removal, but it's like the big debris. It's not like the toxic ash, and that's only like a part of the equation, and it's like all kind of encumbered by insurance and like all these things that like shouldn't be red tape. And people are really just looking for action. People are looking to do things. That the trouble is like making sure that they're doing things that are appropriate for the site. I keep hearing time and time again that like less is more, but we know that pretty much every square mile of California has been tended by indigenous people, really until they've faced genocide from us white settler colonials and colonists, and so because of that, we are totally at a loss for like the appropriate response, and not just response, because that's not proactive. It's like, what do we do every day, every season to prepare and to take action before it's a problem? And so that's something that the RCD is supporting, and from that, since they have these kind of interesting workarounds, and they are interfacing with the community, and but they get grant funding. But because this is such a big project, this is such a big issue, the Wildfire Protectors Corps is a group that's kind of emerged from the community response of people that are meaning to do well and meaning to offer their time and go to all the trainings that are being offered by the Resource Conservation District, go to all the meetings by the like Board of Supervisors, whatever that really means, and the town halls and all these other sort of like little snippets and pieces of the puzzle, because there's a certain number of us that have the privilege to have that time. And so for me, it's like I've got a little bit extra time in my life, so I want to be doing this. This kind of is the culmination of, I think, just maybe how me and like how a lot of other people who've been around here for a little bit feel about giving back to the land and giving back to the community. There's a really kind of strong, close-knit community vibe up in the mountains, and it's double-edged. There's a lot of issues also in Santa Cruz. There's a lot of houselessness. There's the university that keeps adding enrollment, and then the housing situation is certainly in crisis. And Santa Cruz is actually one of the most expensive places to live. I live in kind of like a half room, so I can afford, and I travel enough to like just kind of enjoy outside part of the world. But I wanted to include that slide about the SLV strong, or the San Lorenzo Valley watershed kind of strength. And there is this recognition of the watershed, and there is this recognition of the power of the redwoods. There is this recognition of the wildlife, and the mascot for UC Santa Cruz is the banana slug, and so there's an avid surfing community. So there's all these nonprofits that are already in place that have, again, some kind of like snippet of the bigger picture, some piece of the puzzle that's really important to kind of get everyone on the same page, or at least find what is missing from that, and understanding kind of the context of the community as it was before, like during, and what we want to see it be after. So it's important to leverage what's out there already, including the institutional agencies. But there's tenuous relationships with that, like PG&E, which is our utility provider essentially for electricity out here. They went bankrupt a couple of years back because they faced all these lawsuits from these power lines that weren't being taken care of, and then those were implicated in fires up north. That I drew some of those pictures and some of that information and community response. So this is very big, very not kind of regionalized, but these disaster kind of scenarios are they may just take different shapes in other places in the country, but to me it's related to this overarching climate change issue, and related to that, the politics of politicizing climate change, and it's just kind of disgusting when we start to leave the community. And so that's why I'm I can't interface that much on that end, and I would rather be cutting trees around people's homes that need help because they're disabled or elderly or don't have insurance, and that's a very tangible thing that we can do. And one aspect of that will be this mycoremediation, and we've got a lot of mycophiles in the Santa Cruz Mountains. There's a lot of good foraging to do that I'm excited about. Recently harvested a chicken of the woods that was growing on a rail, chicken of the woods. Although this one was growing on a railroad tie from old growth redwood, soaked in creosote. So this is one of these local endemic mushrooms that also has this interesting substrate that it's growing on, which has elucidated the capacity it may hold for remediation. And so we keep putting the call out to people to find these mushrooms, kind of like a wanted, mushroom.
Chicken of the woods specifically for remediation.
We're looking more at Pleurotus austratus, the oyster, but really there's going to be kind of mushrooms for all sorts of contaminants. We're talking about tens of thousands of contaminants, different types of toxins, many of which are carcinogenic, and we need to have the full suite and layers of a fully integrated community effort around mycoremediation that would involve using multiple species at different times, and really just trying to ingrain that in what the relief and remediation work looks like. I think there's just a really strong emphasis on protecting the watershed, and some of it comes from this zeitgeist of the Santa Cruz area of all these beach bum surfer types that don't want to be surfing in water that's full of carcinogens or E. coli from old septic tanks, or eutrophication from excessive fertilizers or pesticides that are turning into algae blooms, things of that nature. That it's we know the problem. The nonprofits are doing a really great job of elucidating that and amassing volunteers. So a lot of people want to help, but then it's well, what can we tangibly work on immediately? What's kind of our short-term, medium-term, and long-term vision of what we can do, what we want to do, what other folks are doing that we can help with. So there's just so many moving pieces, but it's actually a really great place to be for raising awareness and actually taking action. So one example of that for me, two examples actually related to policy.
Give you a 1 minute warning, okay?
Okay, well, yeah, real quick. So two kind of very tangible, capacities we had to actually leverage the local governance was with a nonprofit I was working for as the director of advocacy group called Project Pollinate, and we passed a resolution to ban the use of glyphosate or Roundup by the city. Yeah, it was a huge victory. It was only supposed to be a pilot program, but it actually got extended and has just basically become permanent. There's a further extent that we could have with that around like it was banning the use by city contractors and city employees. So getting an outright ban would be great, but you know, it's a little touchy for those home gardeners that like feel like they need that. Although there's a lot of like landscaping and gardening services. The other one, just to briefly mention, was the decriminalization of entheogens, or the decriminalized nature movement, and that is kind of also a part of the Santa Cruz zeitgeist. You know, people smoke more weed than I know, you know. So there's kind of this like continuation of like recognizing things and then like being open to changing those things. But there's a lot of work to be done, and I constantly remind people that there's this, to some degree, a liberal or progressive veneer and facade, and underneath it is some deeply rooted systemic issues that just is the status quo that we are working towards. Another thing that will probably come from this, there's people that are interested in more plastic bans and things, but we do have an opportunity in this area to enact permanent policy and social change around like permitting and you know, waivers and things like that to get community engagement, something that's so important. And even right around, I try to include a few examples of the indigenous tribes.
We gotta go.
Yeah, there's this effort to be in communication with the local indigenous populations as well.
Oh, absolutely. Evergreen, thank you so much. Maybe we can host you for another topic. I would love to continue this conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That'd be lovely. Yeah, there's so much. So thank you for all your patience and your hard work. And thank you.
And thanks for all the information. Really appreciate it.